and gentlemen, good afternoon, and welcome to the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies Seminar 1938 and Beyond, Exploring the Roots and Legacies of Modern Jamaica. I thank all of you who have come on time for 3:30. We have a long afternoon ahead of us. This is in many respects a novel event in that what we're doing is not a book launch or two book launches, but rather the appearance of two books is being used to essentially discuss a topic which is very important for us, not only Jamaica but throughout the entire Caribbean. The events of 1938, their significance, and the effects that they have had on the subsequent history of our country and our region. Of course, 1938 was a Jamaican event, but it was one of the last of a series of events that actually began as far back as 1936, involving St. Kitts, Trinidad, and other parts of the Caribbean. And I am not going to try to rehearse that history. We have people here who are charged with that sort of discussion. What I want to say very quickly, though, is that when Ewart Walters first approached me and asked me whether we could launch his book, have a discussion around his book, I immediately said yes and jumped at it, because the book had already become somewhat controversial in Jamaica. There were a number of views that had been expressed in the papers when it first came out. There was a really healthy discussion that was beginning, and I thought that it would be an opportunity to continue it. Almost at the same time, I became aware that Colin Palmer's book, in Freedom's Children, in 1938, Labor of Lebanon and the Birth of Modern Jamaica, had been published. And of course, Colin is a distinguished Jamaican historian who has done extensive work on various aspects of Caribbean history and on historical personalities, which we're not going to rehearse now, although that may come up as part of the discussion. But I thought we would try something new, in that we would do what I would like to call a back-to-back seminar, in that we have a discussion around Ewart's book, and then after a short break, we have a discussion around Colin's book, and that the two can roll into each other, that we're not going to restrict discussion around, obviously we started with Ewart's book, but in Colin's section we're not going to restrict it. We may very well continue the conversation that we've been having. It's extraordinarily important that in a discussion of this sort, that we try to get as best as possible different opinions, and we were fortunate in that Ewart's book had already come out and some opinions have been expressed, and so what we tried to do today is to get a mix of, if you want, non-scholarly academic opinions, as well as academic perspectives. And we've tried, I don't know how it's going to turn out when we actually get down to the discussion, to get different views. It could be that everybody agrees in the end. I just simply don't know what is going to happen. But I've tried at any rate so that we can get different views. And what we hope to generate is a really lively and rich discussion around this very critical part of our history, which is still having a profound effect on who we are today. And history is always being reinterpreted, and that reinterpretation is serving to inform us as to where we go in the future. So I want to introduce very quickly our two panels. I don't think everybody's here yet, but to the extent that I will introduce them now, and you won't see me again, and suggest how we are going to proceed. The first panel is chaired by Claude, who is, of course, an outstanding member of the Jamaican media and an academic researcher for many years at the Mona School of Business in his own right. Then we have Anglican Bishop Gregory, who has gladly, and I should say for us, taken some time off to participate in this panel. When I asked him, he was one of the people who said, let me look on my timetable. Yes, I have a space, yes. And he was very decisive, and I really thank him for that. Ambassador Anthony Johnson was really an inside man. The management studies for many years, and of course, ambassador in his own right. And man about town, is that you to describe it, Tony? and who actually knows a lot about town. Mrs. Maxine Wilson, who is again another insider, associated with SALISES very recently, a senator, political activist, and a member of, like myself, former member of the Department of Government here at Mona. And the man at the end who is the person who is respond to everybody, and the author of the book, We Come from Jamaica, the National Movement, 1937 to 1962, Ewart Walters, your Fats Walters. Welcome home.
Thank you, sir.
And the format, and Claude will take you through the rest of this, is that we're going to have each of these people, beginning, I imagine, with Bishop Gregory, speak to the book following Claude's introductory remarks, and then we're going to have a response from Ewart, followed by a discussion from the floor. That does not appear on your program, so I'm letting you know that you'll be able to go to that mic and speak. And there's a reason why you have to go to that mic, because we're recording everything. It's going to be on our website in a few weeks' time for more than anybody else. So without any, I should also mention that after a 15-minute break, we are going to begin the second panel, which will be chaired by Professor Emeritus Rupert Lewis. It will involve Professor Franklin Knight, who is here. I don't know if he stepped out. He's in the back of the room. Again, one of our, in Jamaica, Franklin, we don't say they come from Johns Hopkins, we say they come from Calabar, right? And also, proud product of this university as well. Mr. Martin Henry, who is known to as well, we say local papers, and also from UTEC. Mr. Arnold Scribertram, who I haven't seen yet, and Colin Palmer, Professor Colin Palmer, who is now here. Colin, welcome. I was about to say you weren't here, but I didn't see that you had come, Colin Palmer. And in the course of the evening, the chair for that panel will introduce all the members and give them their cooking. So without any further ado from myself, enjoy the afternoon. We want this to be a rich and informal conversation. So you must feel a certain freedom to get up if you're tired and go outside, come back. One thing I promise you is at the end of everything, we will have cocktails, and there's an incentive to stay on the break. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. As the chair for this open panel, my instructions from Professor Meeks were quite clear. I have 5 minutes to introduce the author, the book, and the panelists, and to sit down and watch the proceedings after that. And I will try to do just that. I'm going to introduce, in a sense, the Ewart Walters first, then make a few comments about the book, and introduce the other panelists. Irrevocably put asunder by the realities of the 21st century. And in addition to Ewart Walters interrogating these questions, as Professor Lee said, we have 3 very distinguished and able panelists to take you through those and other issues. Bishop Gregory, you know, was enthroned as the 14th Bishop of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands
May 17, 2012. Prior to his election, he served as suffragan bishop of Montego Bay for 10 years. Bishop Gregory has a Bachelor of Arts degree in theology and followed this up with a number of other degrees, including a Master in Business Administration and from the Graduate Theological Foundation in Indiana, and a doctorate in Sacred Theology from Columbia Theological Seminary. For these and other reasons, I think he comes to this seminar equipped to address some of the issues that are raised in the book. Ambassador Johnson, Jamaica's 9th ambassador to the United States and permanent representative of the OAS, assumed duties there in 2008. Ambassador Johnson, like some others on the panel, also began his career in media, and I go back along with him when he was assistant farm editor at the Guinea, and he was also a reporter and producer at the Jamaica Broadcasting Corporation. Somehow, media work seems to form a basis for political work. In the political field, Ambassador Johnson served in Parliament for 27 years. He was a deputy leader of the Jamaica Labour Party and opposition spokesman on agriculture, minority leader of the Senate, and spokesman on education, and so on. Ambassador Johnson is one of the most prolific writers in public life in Jamaica, and is the author of 10 books. And his interests are indeed Catholic. Finally, Maxine Henry Wilson, currently the Commissioner and Chief Executive Officer of Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, a position she assumed in February 2012. And her primary task is to establish this organization and to have it operational with the capacity to carry out its mandate of developing, regulating, and supervising institutions and the tertiary sector. But she's here not really for that. She's here because of her other experiences and positions, including portfolio responsibility in government, when she was Minister of Education, Youth and Culture, and she was also at one time an officer in the People's National Party. And I need to say that Maxine is a graduate of St. Andrew High School for Girls. I'm sorry, I cannot use the accent that it is called, so I simply say St. Andrew High School for Girls. and you can fill in the blanks yourself, but I know she will not forgive me for not mentioning her. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want you to give a round of applause to our panelists, and also in that way to invite Bishop Gregory to be the first presenter.
Thank you very much, Claude. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I regard it as a tremendous honor to be asked to participate as a member of this panel of distinguished persons and to address the particular project at hand, namely this outstanding work by Ewart Walters. To suggest that this work has a lot to say to the Jamaican people who would pay attention is an understatement. For my part, I found it necessary to make reference to this publication in a number of public utterances which I have made since gaining access to it. So, let me offer you in a public way my congratulations and deep appreciation for this work of yours, Ewart. Of course, I cannot miss the opportunity to hail you as a distinguished son of Calabar High School. It should not come as a surprise that the first inkling which the Jamaican people had of the impending publication of this book was by way of controversy and the stirring of the ever-present partisan political sentiments which have plagued this country, and which, in an interesting way, gets to the heart of the message of this book. In a sense, that introduction may be seen as a free marketing strategy which has served to bring to public attention, no one intended, the thesis of your book. On the basis of the identification of controversial elements of a political nature alone, some persons will never purchase the book or read it. I would suggest that in pursuing such a course of action, we opt for the path of intellectual and social poverty if we pursue this line in responding to this publication and other articulated ideas with which we disagree as a people. In his book, Walters takes a realistic view of slavery and its impact on the mind and identity of our people. Emancipation by itself did not have a fundamental transformative impact on these two areas of our people's life. Indeed, what we had was a society divided on the basis of color and as a natural concomitant class and wealth. The affirmation of a strong sense of identity and potential as human beings had to emerge out of the very gut of our people as something to be defined and pursued by us. A major turning point in this regard was the labor unrest of 1937-38, although earlier seeds were sown from the Moran Bay Uprising in 1865 and changes initiated with the introduction of crowd-colony government. The labor unrest was fundamental to the spawning of a sense of consciousness and a movement that would take on a political agenda and would develop to constitute what Walters calls a national movement, the foundation of many of our national achievements, which, as he suggests, we take for granted today. This brings me then to what I understand to be the thesis of this book, namely, that there was a creative phenomenon identified as the national movement, which was located between 1937 and 1962, and which embodied a commitment to national unity and identity, and which was undergirded by a broad-based commitment to community building and volunteerism. In the elaboration of this thesis, he offers his own interpretation of events during that period, drawing at the same time on material from various sources, to argue that the process of nation building was derailed by the development of party politics, which siphoned off the energy and momentum of that movement, while introducing an element of violence and conflict into what was hitherto a national consensus. This was the outcome of the collapse of the partnership which had existed between Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley in the pursuit of the national movement and its focus on nation building. This Walters attributes to an act of subterfuge by the colonial powers, who no doubt were threatened by what they perceived to be the potential power of such a national wellspring of nationalism. The clear implication of this, as perceived by Walters, is the retardation of the development of the nation and a continuing legacy in our national and political life, which continues to derail us from the pursuit of national unity and a common vision for national development. While Walters associates the introduction of violence to the strategy adopted by Alexander Bustamante and cites sources to support his argument, something which no doubt will always be a source of dispute by members of the Jamaica Labour Party and others, the point is that we have inherited a political culture which has been shaped by developments in the divisions and disputes between politics and labor interests of the 1940s. So today we have a culture of political tribalism and a record of a high rate of crime and violence associated with politics in the 1970s and 80s, which I would argue have perhaps taken more lives and shed more blood in this country than gang warfare. But the very system of governance has embedded the legacy of those years in its day-to-day operation. The first example I want to cite is the way in which the role of the parliamentary opposition has been perceived to be that of always opposing what the governing party is seeking to do, and this not in the most creative expression of the Westminster model of parliamentary democracy. Not only has this resulted in a divided nation which has lost its core of unity, but it has also introduced the wasteful notion that every time there's a change of government, every policy and program must be debunked and national resources be mobilized to start afresh. Additionally, it means that there is very little hope of consensus by the various political parties on programs which will continue, notwithstanding changes in governance. So today, we lack a common vision for the development of the country, which can take us beyond our preoccupation with either blaming the IMF or structuring our life to meet its targets. Secondly, the kind of political culture which evolves out of stone throwing at the opposition leads to the development of a political culture which is not grounded in any serious program of political education and the discussion of issues. So consequently, politics at election time can be reduced to mere sloganeering, curry goat feeds, and the purchase of votes. We need only think of the long years it has taken to bring the political parties to the point of agreement to participate in live political debates before the electorate. The maintenance of this kind of political culture has also led to the development of another phenomenon since 1962. Gerrymandering of constituency boundaries could not ensure the muscle and political strength to maintain strong party strongholds, and so garrisons were created, primarily through the use of public funds to create housing developments which guaranteed votes, and where necessary, the tipping of the constituency balance in favor of the governing party. The social ills which evolved from this and which continue to plague our society are no secret. Within my religious tradition, the word remember takes on great theological significance and speaks not only of the obvious sense of recall, but it speaks also of the experience of the past becoming a part of the real experience of the present. So the recall of the events which for Christians is identified as the Last Supper in the life of Christ becomes in the present moment of observance as the sacrament of the Holy Eucharist, the very means by which grace is experienced right now. And while I do not want to attribute an obvious interest in sacramental theology on the part of Ewart, I believe that the value of this work resides also in its potential to not only lead us to the recall of what may have been a glorious period in the history of this nation, but to become a moment for motivation, action, and possibly recovery on the part of the present generation. As a child in the 1950s, I can recall some of the dynamics identified as part of the national movement, as well as some of the movers and shakers who were still alive at the time. I recall the pride with which the late Edmund Burke and other names like Cleve Simon, Rupert Gregory, and others spoke of the projects in which they were involved through the Jamaica welfare, the pride it generated in people, as well as their empowering as individuals and as community. Here we need only note that the focus on community centers as a place of community building and development which the Jamaica welfare engendered has been lost with our divisive politics. Of particular interest to me are the developments in education which took place in the period of the national movement. It was characterized by the development of a number of secondary schools by churches, and the rise of our people to leadership position in various spheres, including education. The latter part of that period saw Jamaicans being able to become principals of high schools. The leadership of the church is indigenized. University education become accessible to children of peasant origin, as well as the formation of several institutions so ably identified by Walters. These did not come without struggle and the elimination of prejudice and self-hate, manifested by those who could not entertain the idea of those of their own hue being in leadership position. There is a sense in which I would assert looking at Walter's work and its value for this nation, those who do not own a story and a history do not have an identity. Without a clear sense of identity, we can never become a people in unity, pursuing a common national and developmental objective. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, hello, Bishop, Minister, and former colleague, Maxine, and there was, are we still colleagues? Ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure to be here this afternoon, and I can tell you, we at the end of the table here have a problem because you have, first of all, Bishop covering the full subject of the book, and then after that, I will come on in, and what will happen to Maxine. It's difficult for us, each of us, to have our own area. And first of all, I'd like to say how important it is that what Ewart has done, he set as an example for more and more people. Jamaica is a small country, and a poor country, a young country, and for us to move ahead, we have to constantly study what we have done, what we're doing, and therefore use that template to what we will do. And there are not enough Jamaicans who, when they come to the end of their career, write books, and books like the serious books. It's very important that it be done. And I would ask everyone here to encourage your friends and relatives and so on who retire to write, and also to buy books, because frankly, this business about publishing and all that in Jamaica, it is very, very hard to sell books because people just don't take up and interest in it. So Ewart has written about a period in which most of us have lived, and so that's so interesting to see how different people see different things. And he takes on some interesting goals. For one, he says, many Jamaicans now recognize that the two-party system divided the country and damaged the maturity, the natural unity that followed the activities since the late 1930s. In other words, Ewart has taken on the two-party system. Now, that's a serious thing to take on, because everybody here, I believe, has been taught that their system is a good system, and it's something that we ought to be proud of, the fact that we, unlike the people in various parts of Latin America and Europe, have the two-party system, and we've made it work for 50 years. He says it damaged the national unity that attended the discussions of the late 1930s. And it's good that these things ought to come to public notice for people who are interested, as well as at every level, to study it and consider it. He goes on to say that the national unity movement has gone down, and Jamaica is the worst off, and that he thinks we really haven't done that well. He's really, putting it to us. As a Jamaican, and certainly as a part of the administration for several years and so on, a teacher and a lecturer and what have you, I felt a little hurt that he was, hitting at systems that I have grown to love, and systems in which I participate, and which hopefully will have provided enough money to keep me for the rest of my days. But the point is that that is not good enough. One must look objectively at what has happened. And so he says at several stages in the book that he thinks Jamaica has not gone as well as it could in most areas, and indeed in most areas has gone backward. Well, all right, so you look at me. Well, let me say this. You didn't mention in the book the problems that we had in the poor people of Western Kingston had. Come from here, we are on the banks of the Hook River, and when the British came, there was a river that ran all the way up from above Mavis Bank through here and went all the way down to the sea. Went through two outlets, one by where we call Harbour View, and the other one, which is now the Newport West. And what happened until I would humbly submit the Jamaica Labour Party in its first term that had pity on the people and started a massive construction program which has made it almost impossible for us to recognize what a great job of engineering was done to move the water from out Halfway Tree, down Haverford Road, and all the way into the sea. And the people lived there. Every year, when there was a flood, what you might call it, rainy season, and a lot of the houses were washed away. Many houses were damaged. Certainly, they couldn't go either out or in. This is all the way down past Spanish Town Road. And that went on for many years. And the only hope that those people had was to borrow money and fix, restart, and so on. You know, the only person who would lend them money? William Alexander Busterman Clark. That's the fact. That was the business that he was in. And this meant that by being able to help the people came to know him. And they had a very productive relationship for both persons. Some people, of course, have made a reference to what is said to be a high rate of interest that's a charge. But I'm sure, I don't know, I wasn't around. What I do know is that if you have had your house washed away, the bed, the shoes of children, everybody have gone, and you won't borrow money, and you don't have a job, you know, it's not easy to pay back. But he had a reputation that he had a gun at a time when very few Jamaicans had guns, and that helped a great deal in ensuring that he was able to maintain some sort of financial stability. But these are the things that we need to talk about and bear in mind. He puts the point that the national movement met often and regularly and discussed a large number of subjects, not to do with anybody's personal gain, but had to do with improving Jamaica. And then he gets to it. He says, you know, well, he didn't say well, sorry. They always met at Drumblare. And now, I lived in Jamaica, I've lived in Jamaica all my life. When I came to Kingston, you have to be careful how you move above Halfway Tree. It's not a place for the ordinary person to move. And I was an ordinary person. I was a middle class kid with all these horseshoes and socks. At a time when you recognized your class by who wore shoes and who didn't. And the point that the meetings took place at Drumblare was one hell of a huge point. That if you are meeting and you're talking about improving the country and doing all sorts of marvelous things, and you meet a Drumblare, for whom are you speaking? With whom are you speaking? And who is doing what you're doing? Well, certainly not the type of person who is in the hall and the drop down houses and the back wall and whatnot downtown. And so, of course, in 1924, when the elections came, the man from down there, 44, sorry. In the 1924 election, 44, that's why you call it quite young. The 44 World War II is in the head. It presented itself in the results, the tremendous results. 22 for Bustamante, 4 for Manley, and 4 independent. That is the kind of period that we're looking at. What? No, but he has taken on one that I haven't heard anybody else taking on, reading extensively, and that is nothing less than the two-party system. He says, many Jamaicans recognize now that the two-party system divided the country and damaged national unity that followed from the activities since the late 1930s. So it is good, though, to have someone take on such a sacred cause. So I thought, well, does he understand if you get rid of the two-party system, what it is that you are going to be dealing with? Oh, yes, he did. He says that you have many other systems and you don't have to go two-party. In fact, if the two parties became one, then you would have a much better system. Sir, you're talking about two parties becoming one. Well, that is dictatorship. Jamaicans don't like that, and I don't think it would be good for us. That's my personal opinion. But it is interesting that it should be put forward. It's always good, better to look, as he says here. Many Jamaicans now realize that the two-party system divided the country and damaged the national unity that attended the discussions and activities that began in the late 1930s. What he states might not be immediately evident is that Jamaica might be much further ahead now had Bustamante remained as a supporter of the national movement in which Norman Manley and PNP played a major role, and not the adversary that he became. Now, most Jamaicans, and self included, are of the view that one of the great assets we have is the two parties, where every 5 years we go to the polls and choose our winner, our leaders. It is true that sometimes we get a little overexcited, and sometimes people get hurt. It's unfortunate, but after the matter is going by sooner or later. The point of the matter is that you have an opportunity to choose and to select, and Ewart is knocking that system. So it is good. It's unfortunate that the format that takes place doesn't allow him to defend the sort of the thing that I'm giving against him, and which I'm sure people like Maxine, who were in the Senate together, we're good diplomats, and we like to have discussion in which many different views contend. That is my opinion, and I'm sure she shares it with me. They've both been teachers in our time, and those are the kind of things that we teach. And in my case, definitely believe. I don't believe in dictatorship. I don't believe in any one-party state. So those are some of the main points that I picked up out of Ewart's interesting book. He mentions a number of people who generally don't come up. Alexander Dixon, the first black man to be elected to the Jamaican Legislative Council. And he mentions Dr. Love from the Bahamas, and fix, restart, and so on. You know, the only person who would lend them money? William Alexander Bustamante Claude. That's a fact. That was the business that he was in. And this meant that by being able to help the people
the people came to know him, and they had a very productive relationship for both persons. Some people, of course, have made a reference to what is said to be a high rate of interest that he charged. But I'm sure, I don't know, I wasn't around. What I do know is that if you have had your house washed away, the bed, the shoes of children, everybody is gone, and you go and borrow money, and you don't have a job, you know, not too easy to pay it back. But he had a reputation that he had a gun at a time when very few Jamaicans had guns, and that helped a great deal in ensuring that he was able to maintain some sort of financial stability. But these are the things that we need to talk about and bear in mind. He puts the point that the national movement met often and regularly and discussed a large number of subjects, not to do with anybody's personal gain, but had to do with improving Jamaica. And then he gives it away. He says, you know, but, well, he didn't say what, sorry. They always met at Drum Blair. Now, I lived in Jamaica, I've lived in Jamaica all my life. When I came to Kingston, you have to be careful how you move above halfway tree. It's not a place for the ordinary person to move. And I wasn't the ordinary person, I was a middle class picnic with always wore shoes and socks. At a time when you recognized your class by who wore shoes and who didn't. And the point that the meetings took place at Drum Blair was one hell of a huge point. That if you are meeting and you're talking about improving the country and doing all sorts of marvelous things, and you meet at Drum Blair, for whom are you speaking? With whom are you speaking? And who is knowing what you're doing? Well, certainly not the type of person who is in the mud and the broke down houses and the back of wall and whatnot downtown. And so, of course, in 1924, when the elections came, the man from down there, huh?
He said 24.
44, sorry, thank you. In the 1924 election, 44, that's why you call it a Freudian slip. The 44 World War II is in the head. It presented itself in the results, the tremendous results, 22 for Bustamante, 4 for Manley, and 4 independents. That is the kind of period that we're looking at, a discussion in which many different views contend, is my opinion, and I'm sure she shares it with me. We've both been teachers in our time, and those are the kind of things that we teach. And in my case, definitely believe. I don't believe in dictatorship, I don't believe in any one-party state. So those are some of the main points that I picked up out of Ewart's interesting book. He mentions a number of people who generally don't come up. Alexander Dixon, the first black man to be elected to the Jamaican Legislative Council. And he mentions Dr. Love from the Bahamas. How many of us know about him and the great work he did to come down? He also mentions Bookman. Now, he is running into problems with me and the Bookman. There's a big argument going about Bookman. He says Bookman was a slave sold by a Haitian to the Haitian plantocracy, and he got himself in trouble, and so on. There's another view, which I support, is that Bookman was a part of the 1760 revolt by Taki, and after that, a number of people scattered. Taki himself was hanged and so on. But Bookman got over to the Republic, the French Republic at the time, and he started the revolution. over there. He was caught and hanged, and his head was put on the top of a light post. This is what one set of sources say. The source that you have says that he was sold to Dominican person or Dominican plantocracy. Now this, let me get the 5 minutes finished. But this is very important for us because there's a move to get Taki made as a national hero. I'm not giving the effort, I hope everybody hears. I think that Taki did a tremendous job. They used modern at the time, modern techniques at just outside Nata Bay, and they caught him and killed him. But he did show that the black man at the time had the capacity to come up against the white forces, and most of the people that were with him got away, including Bookman, which eventually ended up, as you know, in the creation of the Haitian Republic. I'm very, very sorry to be rude and not continuing and not sitting down the minute that the Master of Ceremonies requests me so to do. But you can put down that to my tremendous interest and the stimulation which I've been given by Ewart's tremendous book. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, fellow panelists, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to be sure that I'm reviewing the same book that Tony was reviewed. This is the one I was asked to review, not sure if it's the same one. But yesterday evening, the winner of the Man Book Award, in accepting his award, said, "This is a book that I just had to write." And in reading Ewart's book, I also got that impression. It was almost like an exorcism. There were things he had to say. And I want to really thank SALISES and himself for putting back on the national agenda, in a way, the whole question of the national movement. Because it really represents a strategic perspective of nation building. For many of us, I can see at least 2 other persons in here who were a part of that, we were in Drumblare, we came after Drumblare. But a lot of we were political activists, and we are political activists, and it's an acclaim that I do not share, despite how disparaging people may want to use it. But a lot of our time was taken up as young activists, talking about this national movement. What was it? It was the actual raison d'etre for our involvement in politics. And in a way, it reflected, our preoccupation reflected what Ewart described in the book as the embodiment of the aspirations of a post-independence emergent people. Because we were looking at the national movement as what were the examples, what did it tell us about perhaps missed opportunities, but also about how do you build a national movement. And I just want to identify 3 or 4 things that for me are essential, the essence of the national movement. But even before I identify those 3 or 4 things, I want to say that having reflected for a long time on this whole concept of the national movement and how it emanated and presented itself in the 1938 to 62 period, that for me is like Humpty Dumpty. It has fallen off the wall and it's going to be difficult to put it back together again. So there is the thesis that is presented by Ewart about, is it possible to recreate? I don't think it is possible, but I think there is much for us to learn. So my first issue that I would like to draw from that experience is the issue of how do you build a political movement, and it's addressed in the book. And 1938 was a moment of awakening of the masses. I'm not surprised, but the designation by Walter G. McFarlane, which is referred to in the book as the uprising being unorganized and unled, to me, I'm not sure that that is really accurate. But I think what he's saying there is that you have to be able to open a window of opportunity. And opportunity is presented, and the entire landscape that is painted by Ewart shows all various factors which never needed to come together. But the critical factor there was leadership. That was the critical factor. Now, I think in many ways, as he said, the PNP ultimately in 1938 responded to a deep-seated need for an identity that was comprehensive. So that was really supposed to have been the fulcrum of the People's National Party. And in many ways, the PNP has not done justice to the memory of O.T. Fairclough. And I think this book fills that void to a great extent. Because what we see there is a pushing, pulling, determination, but also the nitty-gritty organizational facets of his work. He was not only involved in the on the ground, but he was also involved in the intellectual. And that's also a lesson that we need to learn. From there, yes, the book says that some people thought it was a hoity-toity place, right, as they say. But everyone who had the drum there experience speaks of it as a place where you could go to reflect, where you could go to think, where you could go to build. And so that takes me to the second. So the first feature has to do with making sure that you have a political movement with a program, and taking advantage of a window of opportunity that arises, but it has to be embodied in some kind of an organizational form. And the organizational form has to do with leadership at all levels. The second aspect, though, which to me becomes preeminent in the book, is that the leadership and the membership has to be multidimensional. We talk a lot about political parties being an intent. I think we have lost that. If you look at both what happened at Drumplayer, what happened at Eloise Park, which was an important part of the emergence of the People's National Party as well, what happened in the general mobilizational work as the movement was built, even before the formation of the People's National Party. It was multidimensional, it was political, it was cultural, and all of this came together perhaps through the Jamaica Welfare Limited. It's a romantic story, and Norman Gervin, the late Norman Gervin, took the time to document it in his book, and it's worth reading and rereading. Where was there the opportunity for people to live and work together on nation building? Jamaica Welfare Limited. So you had the political, but you also had the social and the economic expressed through a mechanism like the Jamaica Welfare Limited that brought the people together at another level to give them some kind of a political purpose. And in that regard, it was a coalition of forces. You had the Jamaica Agricultural Society, the Jamaica Union of Teachers. The third lesson there being that it has to be a coalition of forces to have it, to give the energy and the diversity as required. But it also was able to capture an emergent middle class of black professionals who saw Jamaica as the place where they needed to be at that point in time. And therefore they had a vision as to what Jamaica should be and wanted to be a part of it. Eventually, as he said in the book, becoming a part of the People's National Party's organizational force. So all these factors, however, were also reflected in, or how should I say, it was also expressed in Jamaicans overseas, Jamaica Progressive League. We now try to capture it in terms of the diaspora, but they were not just a sort of add-on. They were the heart and soul of the programmatic platform of an emerging movement. And the emerging movement was not just the PNP, that's the point I'm trying to make. It was a movement that eventually became the People's National Party as a political force. But it went far beyond being a political force. That's where the Edna Manleys came in. They used to sit and talk about what do you need in terms of cultural development in order for you to build a nation. That's where the Eddie Burkes came in, because they would talk about what you need in terms of the community and the social force to build a nation. And all of that, as I said, came together eventually in what came to be called the People's National Party, but went beyond the People's National Party through Jamaica Welfare Limited and the successor organizations. There are 4 things, however, that I did. Before, I'm not here going to speak to the issue or the thesis that because Bustamante's departure that caused a fractured movement. I think there were some other things which included Bustamante's departure. First of all, I think there may have been, and this may have accounted to some extent for the 44-49 loss of the PNP. Norman Manley's equivocation on the issue of independence. For the first time, I sort of got a little bit more in-depth understanding of what that meant. Because remember, the PNP's platform and its pulling of a lot of people was because of this notion of independence. This is 1938 to 1944. When Manley now begins to redefine independence as something that is going to take place within the Federation, and of course Bustamante is saying about federating with these people. What is the expression? It was federation with purpose, right? He says federate with who? With purpose. When there begins to emerge a confusion in the national movement, including people like Fairclough, who felt betrayed by the view that Manley, having signed on to self-government as a precursor to independence, and there being a clear path, that Manley was now redefining it. He was making it far too nuanced. And I think in that he also lost the message to the people of the country. And to me that seems to explain to some extent 1944. We were coming at it too complicated about how we were going to achieve this self-government. The other thing I think which we perhaps underestimate is the expulsion of the 4-H's. Now that has been a much contested issue even in the People's National Party. But the PNP lost both credibility and it lost also some of its intellectual integrity. And you know, when I was doing my third year as a I remember interviewing Arnold, Bernard Arnold, and he actually cried when I spoke with him. And he said, you know, the story of the expulsion of the 4-H's has never really been told. And he told me, okay, he told me that Manley never wanted to expel the 4-H's. That they had a long meeting that went on into the morning up at Drumblair. And at the end of the meeting there was a vote, and there was a vote not to expel the 4-H's. And I'm not going to call the person, I've actually written it down. Put his hand up and said, you have to expel it because I've already sent a letter to the Dina to say that the event of the People's National Party has taken a decision to expel. And Arnold said, I was so frightened at the betrayal that I walked from Drumblair to the PNP headquarters. And I think also the masses, if you read if you read Nethersoul's, sorry, not Nethersoul, if you read Nethersoul's version of it as well, you will see that it undermined the People's National Party's mass base. So even though we say that the departure of Bustamante was definitely a fatal blow, I still believe there were some currents within the movement of itself that gave it compromise. The other sections of the book, you know, the election of April 1962, I don't recall that election at all, but anyway, where you spoke about this, the PNP was so demoralized after the referendum. I think those are very important parts of history that we need to perhaps revisit. The impact of the loss of the Federation, both on the PNP and on the country, because later on you go to talk about the fact that although we had attained independence, it was like a dream deferred, that the country was not excited about it, and there was not a sense that we had achieved much. I don't recall that myself, but critical to that also are your identification of what then became the dysfunctions of our political culture. And I think that is an area that we perhaps need to write that book on, right? Both of us are writing the same book, but we need to really look at what are some of the things that relate to the dysfunction. I think the book is incomplete, and that is probably where those of us who are in the politics, here is Rupert is going to look at me, Those of us who have been immersed in politics, we can write about it. There's a lot that appears in public that when you look at the internal workings of a political party, you do not understand until you actually are part of it. So I think it's a remarkable contribution to the discussion, but I really hope that we have a discussion that does not end up being more fractious than as a contribution to an understanding of really where we are and some of the factors that have brought us to where we are. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start by thanking you for being here and for showing your interest in what I think is a vital subject. And in particular, I'd like to recognize in the audience the son of one of the main promoters of national unity and the national movement. And that is Norman Hill, who is the son of Ken Hill of the National Reform Association, which preceded the PMP and preceded the national movement. I also have to record the death of a very important person who most of you have never heard of, a woman who served as secretary to every Jamaican High Commissioner in Ottawa from April 1962 when plans were being made to open our High Commission there in August that year until the late 1990s. Norma McNamee died in her 90th year, last Thursday night. And along with her, I am to pay tribute to Middleton Wilson, who was my constant companion as I wrote this book. He in Florida, me in Ottawa. Middleton Wilson was an economist who worked at Bank of Jamaica and also with the federal government of the West Indies in Chaguaramas. But he didn't allow his business of being an economist to run him away from the matter of social development, which seems to be how the trend is going in these days around the world. And in that context, this institute that focuses on social and economic research, I think has put the two things in the right perspective. Social first and economic after. We don't do that these days. I am a strong defender of that, and I join with people like Norman Manley, Eddie Burke, Tom Gergon, and all the people in the national movement in that regard. They thought, or they seem to think, that you prepare the social development and the economic development is easier built. Now, the book presented me with a challenge. And the challenge was born of the national inclination of Jamaicans to think of everything in terms of partisan politics. I had to struggle with the challenge of writing about a national movement that really then became part of a national party, or a national party that was built on a national movement. And I had to struggle with trying to keep the story of the national movement alive, although there was this strong tug of politics, some of which you have been hearing so far. But a theme in the book that most people will probably have overlooked is one of the first words in the book, because it's from Psalm 133, verse 1. It's a theme of unity. It says, "Behold how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity." It didn't say in peace, it didn't say in wealth, it said in unity, because unity creates both peace and wealth. And if you can bear in mind that that was part of what I was setting out to do, I think you'll have a better understanding of the book and an understanding of the national movement. So let me thank Professor Brian Meeks for setting this up, and for the panel for expressing these robust views. You have been entertained, you have been enlightened. I'm going to do some reading of some passages. And at some point, I will be answering some questions. So let me get into some of the more interesting passages. I noticed some mention has been made of Bustamante and his lending of money. So I read a passage on that, a very short passage, from page 44 in the book, if anybody has it. 44. As Alexander Clark, he had worked briefly in Jamaica before going overseas, returning at age 50 in 1934. Once returned, he became a usurer who lent money at exorbitant rates of interest and had access to muscle power, if needed, to enforce payments. He quickly set up a thriving usury business at Arlington House Hotel on Beach Street with his private secretary, Gladys Longridge. He catapulted himself into public notice by bombarding the newspapers with a 42-month-long series of letters before St. William Grant introduced him to the people who gathered daily at Victoria Park. The park then became his court. He would arrive there in the mornings in his three-piece suit and top hat, engage all in discussion and commit to the pages of a little book he carried the names of those he lent money and the amounts they owed. Black people were not likely to get loans from banks in those days, and usury, though illegal, flourished as a sort of underground activity run by several people, including Bustamante, who defended it strongly. Lady Bustamante, in her memoirs, written by Ken Jones, quotes a long letter by Bustamante to the dealer, from which is taken this extract. Much has been said about money sharks, and while I agree that they are unscrupulous money lenders, all the latter are not in the same category. But are these money lenders who charge over 100% of monies, which are very often never returned to them, worse than the dry goods store? Are they worse than the dry goods store that make a profit from 100 to 200%? Are they as much danger to the community as the shark who pays his shop girls in King Street as low as 9 shillings per week and his cashier 15 shillings? If money lending should be stopped, what would become of certain elected members when they rank among some of the greatest money borrowers in Jamaica? So that was Bustamante defending his work of lending money. I go to a section from the epilogue in the book, which deals with the garrison phenomenon, and then I'll come back to some earlier, more profound matters. Page 209. I've been talking about some of the developments, some of the progressive developments after independence. We have quite a lot of them. And in this section, I write, but it has not been all achievement. Nation building has been cast from the pinnacle on which it once stood. Present-day Jamaica is a good case study in psychosis. Jamaicans hold excellence dear and revere their countrywomen and countrymen who bring fame and glory to the island with their exploits at home and abroad. Olympic sprinters Usain Bolt and Shelley-Ann Fraser-Price are just the two best examples of the new millennium. Jamaicans also held Lorraine Otti in high regard, but hastily jettisoned her when it appeared she was getting old. The same regrettable treatment was lavished on Ronald Quarry, and before him, Lennox Miller. Once the darling of the nation, Asafa Powell was abandoned and derided because he was no longer coming first. Veronica Campbell Brown, too, faced strict abandonment even before the disputed allegation that one of her urine sample tests contained evidence of a banned substance, although it was not a performance-enhancing drug. President Glory falls quickly into derision. Bolt, an international star from age 15 when he won gold in the 200 meters at the 2002 World Junior Championships, suffered similar treatment. After sections of the crowd booed him at the National Stadium in 2006 when a hamstring pull caused him to stop running a race the fans thought he should have won. In the eyes of spectators desperately needing a lift, the athletes are only good when they are winning. It is as though the people are grasping at anything that would lift them out of the dire economic straits and the continuing appalling murder rates that still spiral way out of control. A moment of glory when Bolt wins another Olympic 100 meters race. A flame at the dance hall with bling. These mask the hardship of life, if only for a few hours. Crime analyst Dudley Allen noted in the 1980s that the country's violent crime cases doubled during the first 12 years following independence. From 1962 to 1974, manslaughter rates increased by 167%, robbery by 771%, rape by 160%, felonious wounding by 137%, and shooting with intent by 1,350%. At the same time, the music has changed and has reflected the society in the most transparent way. It is instructive to follow the music and its social commentary lyrics in order to take the real temperature of the nation. Right, fun loving and laced with laughter and new dance moves for nearly 2 decades from the time of independence, the music lost its lightness. Especially after Bob Marley's death in Miami in 1981, it began to take on a heaviness and crassness that saw a move away from reggae to the slackness of the 80s and the hardcore dancehall of the early 21st century. Compare, for instance, songs of the 60s and 70s, Desmond Dekker and the Aces' Sweet Music, Unity and Aritme, Fruta Shervington's Ramboat Liver, and that, the Ethiopians' No Baptism, Ken Lazarus, Hail the Man, John Jones and No More Heartache, Bob Marley's Nice Time, Lively Orchestra, Trenchtown Rock and Steriton, Shabba Ranks' Trailer Load, and Tinga Stewart's Play the Music. Compare them with the hits of the 80s and beyond. Yellow Man's Galang Galang, Ujo Banton's Boom Bye Bye, Battle Rider, Murderer, and Bring Your Body Come. Nesbitt's Guns Out This Morning and Drive By. High Octane's Gallop in the Body. In very real terms, the change in popular music reflects a dearth of societal mores occasioned by the mass migration in the late 1970s and early 1980s of a strong and vibrant middle class that fled the country. They were escaping a depreciating dollar, political gun terror, the imposed structural adjustments that ravaged health and education, security forces weakened and corrupted by politicians, and the extended failure of successive administrations to do much about the situation. It should not be forgotten that the late 1970s and early 1980s were momentous for the large exodus of the populace to the US and Canada. This differed from the earlier pre-independence wave of emigration to England, in that the UK-bound immigrants of that earlier time were drawn heavily from the salt of the earth farming communities, the rural working class, and this later exodus was more urban middle class, including doctors, teachers, dentists, professors, technologists, midshipmen and captains of industry and commerce, the very people who, as one politician put it, and he's here present in this room, set example and create living standards. It was a virtual handing over of the society by the middle classes to others who were quite ready to create their own standards, sometimes with the help of criminals. In such a vacuum, a new urban ethic emerged, an ethos that paid little attention, if any, to the constitutive authority of laws and the court system, an ethos of overturned values in which blatant, bawdy displays of bling and a dancehall culture replaced the mores that have been so carefully nourished in social development efforts such as Jamaica welfare. Into this vacuum rushed extensive tentacles of fun and drug traffic presided over by dons. Yet, even after the U.S. forced extradition of the most notorious don, the government's failure to announce the name of any charges in Jamaica and to take advantage of the lull in crime by imposing a strong hand produced the amazing spectre of a police commissioner writing not to his Minister of National Security or the Prime Minister, but to the country through the media, setting up precisely the kind of strong hand that he thought was required. One could only read out of this a message that the government was not taking the crime-fighting steps as seriously as it should. The obvious question would be, how did all this come about? What changed? And an answer is given, but for that you'll have to read the book. So, and do two other pieces. One is on Jamaica welfare. Jamaica welfare, as many people in this room know, was really the centerpiece of how Jamaica developed from the 1930s into the beginning of the 1960s. But for some reason, we only get little pieces of it. We don't get a full description of what it was or what it attempted to do. And I probably have not given as full a description as it merits, but I gave it a try. So let me give you a little bit from that. I start with a quotation from Robert Boudin, who was a lecturer here, I think in government. He was writing his son at Vila, August 13, 2006. When Norman Manley launched Jamaica's first national civil society organization, Jamaica Welfare, in 1937, he did so with a philosophy that communities were a critical part of nation building, particularly by encouraging the values of self-reliance, development from within, local civic pride, and care for the disadvantaged. And another quote from Middleton Wilson in correspondence with me: Jamaica Welfare, like the Jamaica Agricultural Society and 4-H clubs, prepared the Jamaican society for independence, and all this saw a great amount of input from Eddie Burke. So a little bit of background and description of the Jamaica Welfare. Jamaica Welfare was in many ways the true foundation of Jamaica, its mores and its outlook. An island-wide phenomenon, it created standards of living and behavior. It did so in a way that did not promote urban drift, but showed people how they could remain in their homes and communities and prosper. It therefore had a much more profound and permanent impact on the island than did the small increases in wages that the unions arranged. It was the difference between eating a bullock cake and learning how to make one. It was founded by Norman Manley in 1937 through his negotiation with the United Fruit Company and Standard Fruit Company, then the two largest multinationals in the world. It was the small banana producers who formed an association cooperative in the 1920s that engaged Manley as their lawyer. Communally based, the Banana Producers Association was formed in the face of stiff opposition from the Boston-based United Fruit Company, which then dominated the export business in Jamaica. By the mid-1930s, when disease wiped out the bananas, Manley was in discussion with the head of the United Fruit Company about the conditions of poverty among banana producers, most of whom were descendants of slaves. It was a time when banana and sugar together constituted the economic mainstay of Jamaica. Neither tourism nor bauxite had yet entered the picture. A type of banana, resistant to the disease, was to be planted, but this plan faltered when many of the rural folk left their homes to seek employment in Kingston. Since the only land black people could own was hillside land, the bananas were grown there. The discussions led to a negotiated endowment from Sam Zimori, the head of the United Fruit Company. In Norman Manley's words, the proposal was that the United Fruit Company would set aside 1 cent per stem exported from Jamaica to form a fund to be administered by him for the good and welfare of the people of Jamaica, with emphasis on the rural people. As Milton Wilson saw it, and I'm quoting what he said to me, for the first time, Patch Battis Taylor closed Mr. Banana Man had a voice in not only his planting and reaping, but in his marketing and shipping. Yes, Patch Batty had shares in ownership of ships. It brought the black peasantry into the heart of business, ownership and management. The formation of the Jamaica welfare was both a social and economic revolution in a quiet way. It brought about an intermingling of the middle and lower socioeconomic groups in one body. It helped in the liberation of the black man from the crushing social burden he bore. While he personally could not get a bank loan, he and countless others in the association got loans and were respected for their turnover at the People's Cooperative Banks, which was the second revolution and also community-based. It was the discrimination by the big commercial banks and their policy of no loans to Patch Batty still not chosen when these came into existence. They mirror our pension for carbon, but they were a little more sophisticated and commercial than the carbon. So when Father Sullivan arrived at St. Maurice College and began to sell the idea of cooperatives, we were a fertile soil for another social and economic transformation of the black masses who learned not only how to do banking, but also how to manage money. Something that Busher and Custos had operated as a mystery. The story of the cooperative movement in Jamaica is not only of an alternative to the bank of the white man and the big brown man, but of the endurance of this quiet revolution. A primary goal of the endeavor was to generate leaders from within the communities. People were made to feel that this was theirs, that they and not some government were Jamaican welfare. They were excited at the idea of becoming citizens of their own independent state, and they were very enthusiastic. The enterprise was driven by voluntary leaders in communities all over the island, consisting not only of teachers and their wives, but also parsons, lawyers, farmers, and others. Each village had groups involved in learning to produce and market craft, bags, baskets, hats, fans, and other straw products. For example, the Jamaica track and field teams to Pan American Games sported straw hats. Girls attending secondary schools wore jicka-jacka straw hats as part of their uniform, and these hats were made in homes in the villages. Indeed, some still do. Villagers were taught how to make nutritional dishes as well as preserves from guava, citrus, bananas, mangoes, and other fruit, and how to bottle them. Literacy classes were conducted in the villages. Jamaican welfare was a pioneer in import substitution. Hartlenita, the late Hartlenita, remembers that during World War II, which lasted from 1939 to 1945, kerosene oil was in short supply, and local castor oil was used as a fuel for lamps. Bakers had to use 10% local cornmeal, along with imported flour, to bake bread. The building of the nation through coffee districts that culminated glorious flour. Norman Manley and his band of volunteers and paid staff made the organization the plank of social restructuring in a colony where the social distances were poles apart. The last thing I want to read for you is a short piece on Maccabee version. Anybody know the song? Maccabee version? I see some heads drop. It's on page 200, and let's find it here. I enjoyed preparing this book, much of which I knew or thought I knew, but which research helped me to crystallize and solidify. And it's amazing what you come up with when you do the research. Late C.L.R. James had a very interesting expression. I think he used it in Beyond the Boundary, where he said, what do they know of cricket who only cricket knows? And I might be able to use that sense in some answers to any questions of a certain time that might arise. Did I say page 200? Yes. The background to this is the arrival of, is really the development of the Rastafari movement, the arrival of King Selassie in Jamaica, and impact on us as Jamaicans, especially on the Rastafarians. The visit of His Imperial Majesty, King Selassie I, to Jamaica in April 1996 had the effect of validating the Rastafari. Thousands of whom came to greet him in pouring rain at the Norman Langley International Airport. As they waited, the rain fell. But the moment the Ethiopian Airlines plane broke through the clouds, the rain stopped. And the assembled brethren knew their God had come. They rushed across all barriers and crossed the tarmac to the side of the plane, awaiting sight of Selassie. When he did finally appear, the shout of greeting was tumultuous. By the time he left a few days later, Rastafari brethren all over the island seemed to be walking taller. Haile Selassie's modest speech to the Jamaican Parliament thanked the people of Jamaica for their support, stressed the long-standing relationship between the two countries, and underscored the goal of international peace as a foundation for progress and prosperity. And I say where the entire speech may be found, and I publish some excerpts. Then I say, Rastafari were overjoyed. They had seized their God. He had come and made common cause with them. They did not even notice that in his speeches he referred to God in a way that made it clear he himself was no God, but mortal man. Nevertheless, Rastafari was given recognition and felt vindicated. But although Rastafari now walked in the glow of his imperial majesty, elect of God, and conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, not everybody was walking in the glow of independence. Some were still casting their eyes across the Atlantic to Africa and things African. Indeed, it was not long after this that a curious song appeared. Max Romeo's focus for this song was the Holy Bible, and the fact that the King James Version omitted the books of the Maccabees that were in the Apocrypha. The Maccabees, also known as the Hammerers, detailing the glorious exploits of Judas Maccabeus, a Jewish guerrilla leader, who had retreated to the hills like the Rastas of Pinnacle, and whose activities fired the imagination of the Rastafari brethren. The song, Maccabee version, was not so much a rejection of the Holy Bible as a claim that something untrue was being foisted on the people. And I'm going to invite those of you who know the song to join with me. You gave I King James version. King James was a white man. You built I dangerous weapon to kill I and all the black man. Black man, get up, stand up, find your foot, and give black God the glory. Black man, get up, stand up, find your foot, and give black God the glory. Bring back Maccabee version that God gave to the black man. Give back King James version that belongs to the white man. Black man, get up, stand up, find your foot, and give black God the glory. Black man, get up, stand up, find your foot, and give black God the glory. Thank you.
Writer, but I will touch on the canonization. I just want to touch on his characterization of the difference between reggae and dancehall. Perhaps you might want to reconsider. I notice his admiration for Shabarans, Gal in a Bungle, and I know that another Calabar old boy was fascinated with men having more girls, but some people see that as denigrating women. But even if it doesn't come along with that analysis, I think you might want to rethink the Buju Banton's murderer and I Octane Girl Given Bond. My recollection of Buju Banton's murderer is that he was saying that blood was on the shoulders of those who were committing murder, and he was talking about his high murder rate. So to me it was a positive. So in the contrast between reggae and dancehall, I think you might want to rethink. And also the one by I Octane, he was saying that he wasn't spending enough time with the lady and he was providing all the financial benefits but not spending time. So the point I'm making, I think you should not just judge the song by the title, and perhaps we want to revise some of those based on that in-depth lyrics.
Thanks, Reverend. Two or three more questions before we ask for responses. Yes? You want to take a note of the questions and then...
Yes, I'm here as a lay person from the inner city of Kingston. I must say, George Lopez, engineer. Congrats to Mr. Walters for taking on this project. And certainly, I've not read it, but from what I've gathered, it's basically well put together. In your last comment, you mentioned about Selassie being here in 1996. I think it's 1966. So that's, But my follow-up is, was Bustamante ever a legally registered usury at the time? And did he pay taxes and all of that of his earnings? Because this will basically put in context the type of businessman he was, and did he abide by the laws of the time? Did your findings incorporate such thing? Because usury, as you know, is really the lowest form of exploiting people and taking away from them the goods that they left over and borrow a fraction of the value on it. The other question is, do you think Jamaica has become a failed state? Which I do believe, and there's much evidence around it, from 1962 until now, based on our political party who have carried the country to where it is. Jamaica is in a serious debt crisis, and if outsiders, or the right person in economics and otherwise, do an analysis, the amount of money that is invested in this country, there's very little show for it on the ground. And as such, part of the way out, which has been happening for a long time, is mass migration, and that will become more and more. And I've said to many young persons, get out, the Jamaica ship is sinking. UWI, like many other institutions in this country, is great and more devalued than even the currency. Attitudes, values, even to get to work right now, they are a fraction of what it used to be way back. And a lot of that is a political disorder brought in this country by both political parties.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lopez.
What do you say, Mr. Ewart?
Got a question. Thanks, sir. Any other? Yes. Ambassador, identify yourself, please.
The name is Arthur Thomas. I'd like to ask a question, and it is linked with what Tony Johnson was saying about having just one political party. My question is that if you are going to establish a national movement, or you are working towards a national movement, in the context which we are discussing, then presumably you'd have to break the back of the colonial movement. And my recollection, fading as it is, reading Eaton's book on Bustamante and then Netford's book on Manly, the New Jamaica, etc., is that Bustamante is rebellious and raucous and earthy style did in fact mobilize people to break the back of the colonial type movement and do some roots to the national movement. And the fact that he didn't, well, he wanted to be the leader of those things, to put it as simple as that. And that probably encouraged him or motivated him to not want a monolithic party. In fact, I seem to recall reading in some book where he said that if you had one party, it would be a dictatorship. So, what having not read Mr. Walters' book, it's really hard to be critical about anything, But I'd like him to really say, or give some reason as to whether he's apportioning credit for the national movement or whether he's just stating some facts about it.
All right, thank you. One more and then.
Thank you, sir. My name is Louis Maria, and I must first of all congratulate you on the tremendous amount of work that is reflected in this volume. And I really want to say this very sincerely to a friend of many years, National President Claude. I was sitting beside Richard Fairclough to come here, and I have observed that in the book, Fairclough is given credit for his tremendous role in the formation of the national movement, and in particular the People's National Party. But there's another seminal leader or co-founder who I think has been shortchanged, certainly by the People's National Party, and I think also Ewart didn't really give him the credit that he deserves. For me, Kennedy was a great catalyst. And please note that all of the discussion that took place around the formation of political parties, progressive political parties, was in the nucleus of the movement, which was Kennedy's National Reform Association. And he was rather self-effacing. He was the Dean's senior court reporter, and he therefore formed friendship with a number of prominent lawyers of the day. He most certainly would have checked Norman Manley to be the leader of the National Reform Association. But Norman Manley was committed to so many of his creations in the 1930s, mostly to do with sports. And Ewart, I think this is very good. He mentioned this. Jamaica Athletic Association, Amateur Athletic Association, Jamaica Boxing Board of Control, Amateur Swimming Association of Jamaica, Jamaica Olympic Association. He founded all of those. And in typical Norman Manley style, he would of course have given all to the effort to ensure that they were
Thank you, Louis. I think about the question. Ewart, can you respond? I don't really have to cut it short because time is running out. We have 4 questions for you to respond. And then if we have time, we'll take another round.
Thank you all for those interesting questions that showed that you weren't sleeping. First one had to do with reggae versus dancehall. And Reverend Dick, I understand the comments you're making in regard to the individual songs and individual singers. What I was doing there was showing that there was a difference in tone and in approach in the early years and the later years between the kind of things that people are singing about. And that's all I was doing. I wasn't really attributing to any of the singers any particular thing. But things changed during a certain time, and singers and songwriters began to reflect those things. Things at times changed. So I'm just making a comparison there. Was Bustamante?
Mr. Chairman. Tom Gervin, father of Norman Gervin, and Jamaica Welfare.
I know, but you still have to introduce yourself. Remind me, I know, but can you introduce yourself for us, please?
Father McLaughlin from
Yes.
St. Louis.
Yes, I know.
Was the founder of the first credit union in Jamaica.
Yes.
He founded the first credit union, the Clark Credit Union, in 1937. It lasted about 2 years and then was liquidated. And then the credit union moved in back and back. Just a bit.
Okay. You have a question? You have one question here, Ms. Christine. Yes, please, and introduce yourself. And this has to be the last round of questions.
Christine Cummings, Department of Government. I wanted to know the role of Lucas Cricket Club in particular in the national.
Lucas Cricket Club.
Because that actually preceded even the Garvey movement.
The role of Lucas Cricket Club. Anthony?
Yes, grateful for the question on Bedwood, because I think he is a sort of
Everyone, my